This is war. And unfortunately, it is no.
In many stories that we read, death is an easy way out. It doesn't really matter who's on the receiving end. If it's a hero, then we shed some tears and move on. If it's a bad guy, then we sigh in relief and still move on. But in many other stories, some characters are put through so much suffering that death starts to look merciful in comparison. Invincible's one of those comics where a few characters were handed out such relentlessly cruel fates that it almost makes you think death would have been much kinder. Robert Kirkman has a gift, or a curse, depending on how you view it, to bring out the rawest emotions in his readers using nothing more than a few words. He's a master at personifying how survival is often not the end of suffering, but the beginning of something that would have put even death to shame. In today's video, I'll explore 10 characters from Invincible who had fates worse than death. A lot of these broke me the first time I read about them, and to be honest, they still haunt me. Robot, Rudy Connors. Rudolph Connors was the leader of the teen team and had a brilliant mind, but his story took a drastic turn when he got dropped in the Flaxen dimension. Starting out as a supporting hero, he became one of the main antagonists in the comics. I could not help but root for him at the beginning, and I know he betrayed Mark, but a part of me still finds his life to be more tragic than villainous. For those of you who are following the TV show, you must have seen how Rudy and Amanda got trapped in the Flaxen dimension in episode 4 of season 3. It's pointed out quite prudently by Cecil that the planet survived the last invasion because Omni-Man took the fight to the Flaxen homeworld. But this time, they came prepared with a ton of advanced technical stuff they could use to hold their own against Invincible. Rudy and Monster Girl enter through the portal to find the temporal emitter of the Flaxens and destroy it for good. They succeed too, and this causes the Flaxens on Earth to age very quickly and die. However, one surviving Flaxen soldier makes his way to the portal and closes it, leaving the pair trapped within the dimension. In the Invincible comics, their time there is described in detail, which truly brings to light just how they survived 7 centuries there and the obvious effect that had on both of them. Rex and Amanda went in thinking they could stop the Flaxens from ever invading another planet again, despite being warned not to, and unfortunately, they got stranded there. Surrounded by soldiers, they had to surrender. Robot did not change his form, so he assumed that the Flaxens thought of him as the mechanical companion used to control Monster Girl, who also remained in her monster form. He even managed to learn the basics of the alien language in a month or so by picking up on their communications. Initially, he wanted to just lie low and observe his captors so he could get back to Earth as quickly as possible. But Rudy later came to know that time worked differently in the Flaxen dimension, and his efforts to gain freedom earned him many misadventures. 20 years after their capture, Rudy and Monster Girl were punished by the Emperor when they tried to attack the latter, and the Flaxens realized that Rudy was not exactly a robot at all. Rex also told her how the very aim of their invasions was to capture slaves, because all Flaxens were warriors, and they needed people to do every other job. When they were stopped, it was the work of one individual, Invincible's father, Omni-Man, he said, emphasizing how the aliens had brought Omni-Man to their world, and he was known as the Destroyer. The fight with him lasted for a whole year according to the Flaxen time, and their capital of Claxia was completely in ruins as a result, and Rudy believed that he and Amanda were being taken there to rebuild the city. She remarked how he must have become less smart in the last 4 years because that made very little sense. However, Rex had a plan. Time was on their side, he told Amanda, because they would barely age, and with their combined strength, they could build the city easily. With them making progress, the legend of the Earthman who almost defeated the Emperor would also become more popular. Ultimately, more slaves would be sent to Claxia to help Rudy and Amanda, and while generations would pass for Flaxens, they would age by just a few months. Soon enough, they would be in a position to revolt with an army of slaves loyal to them. It may take us nearly a century to put all the pieces in place for this plan to come together, he agreed, but once we've accomplished all this, we will be well within grasp of our ultimate goal, ending the threat of the Flaxen Empire to all dimensions forever. I have to admit, it was one hell of a plan, and a noble one too at that, because he was not trying to rule the Empire simply because he craved power. His primary intention was to make sure the Flaxans could never invade another planet again. Along the way, he fell in love with Amanda, not just for her companionship, but for her compassion towards the Flaxans. With the war won, they chose to stay back and rule the planet together, but that's when the difficult part began. Rudy became too busy to deal with getting the Empire rebuilt, and slowly started drifting away from Amanda. She, on the other hand, differed with him greatly about how he treated the descendants of the previous Zaxel royal family. The fact that they could not have children also added to the growing distance between them. The two things that finally broke Rex were both about Amanda betraying him. Once by joining the Zaxel heirs to bring him down, and then by cheating on him with Zal and siring a child. That was the point he realized he did not belong there anymore, and returned to Earth with her. But he was never the same Rex who entered that portal. 700 years of war, strategy, imprisonment, isolation, and heartbreak had changed him. He knew he was the smartest man in any room, so what followed afterwards was not random. Everything he did that turned him into a villain in the eyes of the people who once called him a friend, all of that came from his time in the Flaxan dimension. Every year during the flashback arc stacked up over time until Rudy just stopped being Rudy. You might be thinking that his fate is not exactly the worst out there, because, of course, this is Invincible we're talking about, and way worse has happened. I'm not denying that, but the psychological toll of spending 700 years on a different planet and going through the entire 7 stages of grief over and over again made Rex lose himself piece by piece so slowly that he probably didn't even notice it happening until there was nothing left to notice. He was supposed to have a happy ending with Amanda there, and they both deserved a break, but life had very different plans for them. Monster Girl, Amanda. Amanda's fate is inseparable from Rex's. He became an antagonist largely because of her influence, and she herself was not able to escape the part she went on to play in his machinations. There was already something tragic about that before the Flaxan dimension ever entered the picture, but Kirkman was not done with her. When Amanda was a young girl, she fell in love with a rich boy whose grandmother disapproved of their relationship. After witnessing them getting intimate with one another, she cursed Amanda, which pretty much made her turn into her monster form at random times. While she was able to control this later, with every transformation she ended up aging in reverse. Amanda chose to become a hero and help people, but I cannot help but think about how lonely her life must have been. Without trying to sound too much like a pop psychology enthusiast, it's very plausible that she developed a fear of intimacy because that was what got her cursed in the first place. And then, when she regressed every time she used her powers, people who were actually her age infantilized her. Or worse, maybe she even received the wrong kind of attention, you know? Anyway, that's just what I believe. As I mentioned, she entered the Flaxan dimension along with Robot, and was assumed to be just some giant green monster there. She was used as a champion for the Emperor and made to fight because no one knew who she really was. Before they were trapped on this planet, Amanda and Rudy already had a deeper connection, which only grew stronger. When two people are stripped down to nothing and only have each other, bonds form in ways we cannot comprehend. Rudy and Amanda's relationship was not just chemistry or romance, it was forged in survival. And it sounds great on paper, but the uncomfortable truth is that this made it both more intense and more fragile than they could have imagined. This is very evident from Rudy's flashback scenes when he keeps saying how he only saw Amanda and nothing else, and how every attribute of hers fascinated him. Under the pressure of 7 long centuries, this carefully built trust slowly started eroding. While Rex started becoming more authoritative, embodying his role as the Emperor, he failed to notice how Amanda was changing as well. The very thing about her that he praised, her compassion, that had become the point of contention in their relationship. Rudy had assumed that they could live forever in the Flaxan dimension and rule side by side, but he did not account for the fact that Amanda was someone who always felt things too loudly. And forgive me for going off track here, but I also noticed how the comics never addressed Amanda's emotional fallout from being paraded around as a monster and made to fight other champions like she was just a mindless creature. Winning the war took a really long time. Yes, and it took a massive toll on both of them, but we forget that Rudy's imprisonment had been very different from that of Amanda's. The Flaxans knew he was a person, but they never got to know her as anything beyond Monster Girl until way later. She needed Rudy not just to consider her his co-ruler, but to give her attention. Mind you, she'd never had this before in her life. Declarations of love are not enough for any relationship, right? And I'm not completely blaming Rudy here either, because he also didn't know any better since he was not good with emotions. And then the betrayal happened. Whether it was a genuine feeling or simply the desperate human need for warmth from someone, I don't know. I can't condone what Amanda did, but on some level, I feel sorry for her because she didn't do it to hurt Rex. And I know this is what the author intended to convey as well. She was just reaching out for some comfort after having spent her whole life fighting different kinds of battles. And then she joined the Zaxel heirs to overthrow the man she loved. This I definitely think was just delusion from her end, and I'm not going to justify it at all. And even though she made up for it later, Rudy did not deserve to go through that long period of isolation and pain just because Amanda put her faith in the wrong people. What sucks even more is how he spent that entire time writing letters to her, apologizing, blaming himself, and then finding out that she had cheated on him. If that's not enough, he also got to know that Zal was impregnated by her in her monster form, and that was enough for him to want to return to Earth. This reminds me of how Rex went, she's his father. It's complicated. What a way to diffuse the tension, truly. Amanda had no idea about this until much later, but the fact that she came clean to Rex tells everything about how much she regretted her actions. She could have just kept quiet and sealed the mouths of those who knew, but she needed him to know the truth and forgive her. But by that time, whatever remained of what they had built together during those centuries had already shattered. Her efforts to reach out to him never really landed after this because Rudy was already too far gone into what he was becoming. She was trying to salvage a relationship with someone who had become a different person than the one she had fallen for. She came back to Earth carrying the weight of 700 years, endless wars, the affair, the relationship she couldn't save, and the guilt of her choices, and was expected to just start over like it was Monday. When she finally got to know about her child with Zal, she even exclaimed that she would have chosen to stay back and raise him because she desperately wanted children and couldn't have any with Rudy. In the end, you can see how Amanda left too much of herself back in the Flaxen dimension to ever come back fully, which is why she kept trying to reconnect with Rudy and couldn't just forget about their shared history back there. And when she said, "I loved you more than anyone has ever loved anyone," it really broke me a little because she was not really asking for Rex's forgiveness, but hinting at how she could never forgive herself.
Why do you think I was softening you up?
Angstrom Levy. We all agree that Levy is one of the most notorious villains in the comics. I know some fans tend to glaze him, but I would say he became a pretty well-rounded bad guy. You do feel for him at times, but a lot of his actions are otherwise not excusable at all. There's truly no justification for tossing Oliver around like that. As a brutal but unethical scientist, his ability to create interdimensional portals and manage multiple realities could have come in handy if he'd not been so hell-bent on killing Invincible. When he recruited the Mauler twins to help build a machine that would copy the memories of his alternate reality counterparts into his own brain, Mark was trying to apprehend them. Unfortunately, the machine overloaded and exploded, leaving Levy horribly disfigured. Moreover, the memories of 1,000 different versions of himself hating Invincible drive him completely insane. He then kidnapped Debbie Grayson and baby Oliver to lure Mark out and broke her arm for trying to escape, but this was not enough. So, Levy later hatched another plan to destroy Invincible by making him fight against himself. He gathered evil versions of Invincible from across all dimensions and unleashed them on Mark's world. While many heroes die trying to counter them, his plan ultimately fails once more, and it's Eve who shows him the path towards redemption. He's not a violent psycho to begin with, just amoral. He definitely cuts corners to get what he wanted, but never in an excessive capacity to intentionally hurt others. All of that changed with the accident when his memories got distorted, and he was no longer of sound mind. Think about it. You gain the cumulative memories of 100 different versions of you. How will you be able to differentiate between what your lived experience is and what has simply been transferred to you? When the accumulated rage, pain, and loss from 100 different lifetimes pour into one man's consciousness, it's the perfect recipe for disaster. A lot of fans talk about how he targeted Mark, the good Invincible, when he could have just fought the bad versions. But I think he was trying to target the good one with the intention of just killing all the versions, making the entire universe a place without any Invincibles. Mark became the main obstacle because he refused to become the monster Levy believed every Invincible eventually would turn into. His own character flips the hero-villain understanding because he refuses to see himself as a bad guy. To him, Invincibles were time bombs, so getting rid of them was simply a way to ensure that the universe would become a safer place. He didn't realize that by doing this, he became the very thing he was trying to defeat. He was a victim of his own circumstances, circumstances, but he was trying to redeem himself after talking to Eve. This is what gets me. I'm not going to sugarcoat who he was just because I feel bad for him, but he was truly on the path to redemption before Robot ended him. A clean death in that explosion would have been kinder and saved not just him, but many others a lot of pain.
If this is some joke or some weird sex shit, my dad's gonna sue you into the Stone Age.
Rick Sheridan, Reaniman victim. While Levy's pain came from 1,000 minds screaming at him, Rick's trauma was quieter, but just as personal. He was just a college kid. He was not supposed to be involved in any superhero stuff and should have lived a quiet, happy life. But he was kidnapped by D.A. Sinclair to become one of his Reanimen, experimental cyborgs made out of dead as well as living people. He was experimented on, tortured, and ripped apart, all while retaining his consciousness, aware of what was happening to him. The other Reanimen were pitiful too, but they were all dead long before Sinclair got his hands on them. Rick did not receive this grace because somewhere inside the cybernetic nightmare Sinclair created, he was still present. He was aware of what his body was becoming, but was unable to put an end to it, communicate, or even die and stop his own suffering. And we know this because he retained just enough memories to recognize William when he was being attacked. Rick did not get a battlefield death like so many other characters in the show or in the comics. Instead, his agency was taken away, and he spent these moments as a whole person staring at a psycho trying to zombify him. There was no hope for him right from the beginning. And even when he comes back after having been treated by the GDA, he suffers from intense PTSD and becomes borderline suicidal. And can you blame him? As Donald Ferguson says, the trauma that Rick went through made him retain only some memories from his time as a Reaniman, and as such, he was just a robot skeleton. So he was aware enough to suffer, but not enough to have been able to stop it. Sinclair did not deserve that second chance. This is a hill I am willing to die on.
After a year in a Viltrumite prison, I could use a warm-up.
Prisoner Invincible, alternate Mark. We see him for the first time in issue number 60, when Levy pulls him along with the other versions of Invincible to attack Earth. Known more popularly as Invincible, he looks identical to Mark Grayson except for his bald head and severely burned body. He's also way more muscular than the other variants and has tan skin. He wears the standard prison uniform from the Viltrumite prison asteroid. We don't really know a lot about his past and how exactly he ended up in prison, but his time there cannot be classified as anything less than horrifying. Aside from the psychological and physical torture, he was exposed to the Scourge virus, which weakened his regeneration, making him feel more pain. This prolonged abuse is probably what gave him his burnt, veiny skin and hair loss, as the healing factor was not able to reverse these. The only reason why he survived was because of his exceptional physiology, but that kind of experience leaves anyone with a completely broken mind. He was no exception. Many fans believe that Invincible was not that different from Mark Grayson of Earth, but was turned into a shell of himself due to his abuse at the prison. After Omni-Man of that dimension revealed his loyalty to the Viltrum Empire, this Invincible probably tried to stop his father as well. However, Omni-Man possibly ended up remaining loyal to his cause, which resulted in his son's imprisonment. This is a very grim reminder of what could have happened to Mark as well, to be honest. The reason why people believe in this is that the first thing Invincible said after appearing in the comics was, "After a year in a Viltrumite prison, I could use a warm-up." He also said that what he was about to do to Moscow was nothing in comparison to the treatment that awaited his father when he found the man. So yeah, the daddy issues were bad enough, and if this backstory is true, then this Invincible is the most tragic variant out of all the ones that we've seen so far. Even thinking about how he ended up in a prison cell for a year and was reminded every day in the most violent way imaginable that being hard to kill is not the same thing as being alive. That's just so messed up on so many levels. Ultimately, he found himself trapped in the Wasteland universe with 7 other evil Invincibles. Here's where things get way worse, because fans believe Invincible was actually eaten by Sinister Invincible in this dimension, and the skeleton we see in the panel belongs to him. If this is true, he did eventually die, but I would prefer being shot in the head over being eaten by a crazy version of me from another universe. Just saying.
Immortal?
The Immortal. Remember the third season, episode 4 of the show, titled You Were My Hero? Here we see an alternate version of Immortal who rules over Earth as a tyrannical dictator, and Mark travels through time to put an end to his rule. The episode was adapted from issue number 54 of the comics, and I just want to first start by pointing out how his name becomes the very bane of his existence, because the entire point of this storyline is that he wishes to be killed and has lived too long. Irony can be cruel, am I right? Because immortality here is not the untouchable, comfortable idea that gods live with. It's more like a curse that makes you watch everyone and everything perish while you slowly descend into insanity. The Immortal from this episode did not suddenly decide to become a tyrant one morning. He became one at a glacial pace, through the accumulated burden of centuries of loss and isolation. There is a very specific kind of madness that haunts him because he simply cannot die, no matter how much everything around him does. Mark and Eve go on a romantic date in Paris at a rooftop restaurant with a great view of the Eiffel Tower. My boy is really pulling out all the stops. Unfortunately, they're quite rudely interrupted, and despite his initial refusal, Mark ends up traveling to the future, where a once benevolent ruler has turned into a psychotic despot. Hundreds of years ago, society in that timeline was about to be gone for good, when this man stepped up and restored order. But now, he has to be stopped. Mark goes to meet this ruler, and is surprised to see that it's none other than Immortal. The latter also recognizes him immediately because no one alive knows that his name is that. He then says that he carries within himself a great sorrow, and Mark asks if it's because of what happened to Kate. For a moment there, we see the other man's visor break just slightly as he tries to recall who Kate is, but the next second he bursts out in rage and says he doesn't know anyone by that name and wishes nothing but death for himself. Mark does not know what to say, so Immortal asks him to kill him and says that he'll be doing him a favor. Seeing his facial expressions and ramblings in the comic as well as the show makes you really feel bad for him, because immortality has truly become a curse for him. He says he does not care about the world he leads and has tried to kill himself to no avail. "You could give me the eternal peace I've longed for," he says to Mark. He finally becomes violent and instigates the boy to attack him. What made me pause for a moment while reading this issue was how Immortal acknowledged that he had killed women and children, knowing that they were innocent, just because he wanted the people to revolt and kill him. He became a monster because immortality did not come with an off button, and he was forced to exist against his will. Finally, Mark decapitates him, but the implication of what he's just done hits him harder than he expected. He acknowledges how Immortal was once a good person, who lived alone for so long that he lost his humanity. The Immortal got what he wanted and was killed, but the cost he paid to get to that point and the misery he inflicted as a result of the same could have been avoided with a clean death.
Help me make sure.
Darkwing II. During my first reading of issue number 60, I actually just glossed over the fact that Darkwing II did a pretty heroic act by presumably sacrificing himself. Don't blame me, there was a lot of stuff happening and Rex died like in the next panel itself, so I was obviously distracted. But when I watched the show, I realized that I had completely overlooked this detail. Remember the Invincible that didn't wear goggles and how very Joker-esque he appeared to be? This dude acts like he finds pure joy in hunting others for sport. He stands his ground against Shapesmith, Immortal, Duplicate, and all her duplicates, as well as Black Samson, and exclaims how they're all just clowns who don't deserve to be called Guardians of the Globe. Just as he gloats about killing all of them easily, Darkwing II appears from behind and clutches him in a death grip, saying, "We're not dead yet." He takes no gogglesable into the Shadowverse. When the fallen heroes try to get up and recover from their wounds, Black Samson remarks that Darkwing must have been killed by the madman in the Shadowverse. So, it's now sealed forever, and thankfully the evil Invincible is trapped there. All in all, he sacrificed himself to save everyone else. People do not talk about this a lot, and it really makes me sad, because Darkwing II knew full well what he was doing. He locked himself inside his own power and threw away the key. And he did all that just to protect people who may not have even had the time to notice exactly what had just happened. Just like how I was too preoccupied to notice it in detail when I read it the first time. We have no idea what fate awaited him in the Shadowverse, but considering that he was trapped with a sadistic psychopath, it can't really be a happy one. Darkwing II took one of the most selfless calls in the Invincible War and deserves to be lauded as a hero just as much as Rex is. Powerplex. Now this is what I truly call suffering a fate worse than any kind of death. Before becoming Powerplex, Scott was a man who really had it all. His wife Becky, his son Jack, his sister Jessica, and her child. The battle between Omni-Man and Invincible changed this, when during their fight, a building was razed to the ground. Jessica was inside, and the casualties were so bad they weren't even able to recover her body later. Overnight, Scott turned into a vengeful man who stole technology from the Pentagon lab where he worked to power himself with electricity. His only goal was to kill Invincible and avenge not just his sister, but all the thousands of people who had lost their lives. He staunchly believed that Invincible and Omni-Man were working together and everything was just for show. Becky supported him completely in this decision, calling Invincible a monster and saying that he deserved what was coming for him. Initially, Powerplex tried to lure out his enemy, but when Invincible was not just biting the bait, he decided to go all out and use Becky and Jack as a distraction. He told her that he had sent a message saying that he would kill them if Invincible did not show up alone. The latter does, and asks him to let the prisoners go. Looking back, Scott's obsession with revenge for his sister ended up being what took away the rest of his family. Angrily, Powerplex asks Invincible if he knew who Jessica was, and how she was working to pay for college, and was probably terrified in the last moments of her life when the building collapsed over her. Mark honestly replies, saying, "I'm sorry. All I can say is I'm sorry," which is the name of the episode from the show. He also tries to free Becky and Jack from the ropes around them, but she spits at him, taking him completely by surprise. Powerplex launches the final attack, unleashing a massive wave of energy. In a cruel twist of fate, this ends up frying his wife and son to a crisp and does not hurt Invincible in the slightest. Scott becomes a madman, blaming Mark for this tragedy as well, before he finally collapses in front of the bodies and sobs. He sacrifices his family, trying to avenge his family, and blames Invincible. But I think some part of him knows that it was not Mark who set off that surge. He can be furious at himself for losing control, and he can plot against Invincible as much as he wants, but neither will bring Becky or Jack back. They're still gone, regardless of where the blame settles. What makes Powerplex's fate so brutal is the fact that he survives and keeps carrying the full weight of the knowledge that even if Invincible had handed him the gun, he himself pulled the trigger. Omni-Man, Nolan Grayson. I know how weird it is to say that the person responsible for at least 70% of all the chaos in Invincible is kind of a tragic character. He finds redemption and stands against his fascist empire, but after having slaughtered hundreds of thousands of innocents. The scale of violence that he causes, whether directly or indirectly, absolutely makes him a villain, even if he finally changes for the better. You tell me, does his later heroism justify or outweigh his past actions? Is it even possible to do any kind of good that can redeem the indescribable harm he's brought to so many people? We just spoke about Scott Duvall and his tragic life. Is there any way to know just how many Scott Duvalls have been wronged by Omni-Man's actions? Well, if I start talking about him, I just might keep you here all day. Some of you might say that Nolan Grayson deserved everything that happened to him, and I agree with you, and I will go to the extent of saying maybe he got off too easy. In issue number 29, Nolan gets captured by the Viltrumites while trying to save Mark from them, and tells his son to read his books before being whisked away. He's imprisoned, but not killed immediately, because their diabolical law states that executions only happen when prisoners are at full strength. Viltrumites are healed completely and then killed, because anything less is considered an insult to the dignity of what they are. Omni-Man's imprisonment is, therefore, a cycle of damage and recovery that exists specifically to keep him alive and healthy until he can be killed. He is constantly beaten and abused until he's almost destroyed, and then after his body repairs itself, he is once again subject to that same punishment. Nolan cannot go mad from it or disassociate because his mind is as resilient as his body, which in this context is far from being a gift. So he sits with the weight of his guilt and the hope that his children are safe. Finally, in issue number 55, he escapes with the help of Alan the alien, but only after living through the worst kind of hell. Cecil Stedman. Cecil is that guy who knows that he has to do bad things for good reasons. He's acknowledged how he would make a deal with the devil himself if that would safeguard Earth, because that's his job. He didn't ask to be liked or worshipped, and he was never going to be a heroic figure. At some point, it felt like Cecil was always going to be prepared for anything the universe could throw at him, and maybe he himself became arrogant enough to believe that he could never be bested. This caused him to become the architect of his own undoing, because robots' systematic takeover of nearly the whole world came from none other than Cecil. It was he who handed over the intelligence and understanding of the GDA infrastructure to Rex because he trusted him. He never moved beyond seeing Rex as an asset, and this is exactly what the latter took advantage of. The way he tries to calm both Rex and Mark by placing himself in between them just seconds before getting his neck sliced feels almost cinematic. Rex gives him a quick death, but not before Cecil realizes what's about to happen. He spends his final moments watching his life's work burn down, knowing that he enabled it. Not being able to find peace while drawing one's last breath has to be one of the cruelest ways to go. Not being able to find peace while drawing one's last breath has to be one of the cruelest ways to go. This list is why I believe Invincible is one of the best things that has happened in the superhero genre. Every character is written with a depth that readers just cannot disregard. Some of the names on this list deserved better, while others had it coming. Let me know in the comments if there's anyone else you can think of who was dealt a bad card in the comics. I would be really grateful if you could share this video with your friends and support our work.